The recordings, I also want you to know that we have closed captioning turn on. You can enable or disable it at the bottom of your Zoom screen under live transcript. Once we have the recordings edited and the transcripting corrected, we will post the recordings of all the sessions online. Be aware there's only a few of us, so that could take a while. In fact, we were just talking today, should we just put them up the way they are and then replace them as we edit them? But so there's that. I hope that you will, particularly since this is a real kind of deep dive into course redesign, engage in the chat. I'll be here the whole time and love to participate in the chat as well. I wanted to also let you know that that I think that's it. Oh, that I'll be in the chat. We do stop right at 3:45 because we're using the same Zoom rooms for all of our sessions. So with that, I would like to turn the time over to the presenters today. And Dr. Ko, should I start with you?
Yeah, that works for me.
And I think what I'll do as we go is I'll spotlight and unspotlight as we shift the primary presenters. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, so hi everyone. We've been asked as poster presenters to give sort of a short spiel. So besides introducing ourselves, just sort of summarizing a little bit of what is contained in our posters. I encourage you to look at the posters and also watch the accompanying videos. But if you haven't had the chance, we want you to feel like you can still participate in this conversation. So I just want to give you a brief overview of my work. So the title of my poster is Teaching Practices, Equity and Inclusion Rubric Gone Online. And so I presented last year on what we called the Course Design Equity and Inclusion Rubric. I'm actually going to quickly put a link in the chat. So here's the Course Design.
Also, Melissa, while you're doing that, I forgot to mention I'm putting the Padlet link in, and that's a place where we're collecting comments and stuff about each session. So feel free to engage there too.
I think you posted a Zoom link though. That's what it looks like to me.
It's the end of the day and I'm tired. I will fix
No worries. But yeah, if you want to post that. But yeah, what I posted in the chat was a rubric that I posted, I believe, at last year's conference, which is a course design rubric that is meant in many ways to be kind of similar to the Peralta online equity rubric. It is actually inclusive of both online and in-person modalities. What we were working on for this new year that I'm presenting this time is actually a teaching practices rubric. And so what it's intended to capture is more of sort of the synchronous elements of how students interact with each other and how they interact with the instructor and interact with the space that is provided. So what my poster looks like, which I encourage you to view, oops, wrong button. I also feel like it's been a long day. Hopefully you can see my screen. This is just sort of a preview of my poster. I encourage you to view it, on your own device, which is certainly better because then you can zoom in and see some more of the small text. But this is just an overview of the process by which we created this new rubric, which is meant to be a companion to that past rubric. So whereas the past rubric was really focused on design choices, which would manifest in looking at the syllabus or looking at the course website, this was meant to really look more at things that were more manifest if you participated in a class session, because there were aspects that sort of didn't make it into the earlier rubric that we wanted to capture in a separate companion rubric. And so I sort of summarized the process that we went to create this rubric and some of the frameworks or teaching philosophies that impacted the design of this rubric. I actually have a link both in this poster, but I'll also post a link in chat for this new rubric. So this is sort of our part 2, a continuation of our work. So this is the new teaching practices rubric. You can click on that second link. This is like the newest addition to the family. And what we're really interested in is actually thinking about how this could be applicable to online education. This was when I was at my past institution. Actually, this was created while I was at Stanford, and they're moving a lot of their courses back to being in person. But I think that there will always be continuing demand for online education for various reasons. And so we were thinking about how this could actually be applied to Zoom class sessions, but then things would need to be adapted. And so I'm really looking forward to some dialogue about what things will need to change to accommodate that. So yeah, that was my poster presentation in a nutshell. So I'd like to pass it over to Melissa Bowles-Terry if she would like to share.
Thanks for sharing that awesome rubric. That is so super cool. So thank you, Dr. Coe. My name is Melissa Bowles-Terry, and I'm at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and my colleague Suzanne Becker is here too. Suzanne is my collaborator on this project, and we worked with a whole team who I'll shout out in a moment. I'll just show you quickly here what the main part of our poster. So our poster, if you haven't seen it yet, is all about an online course that we developed called the Equity Institute Online. It's for faculty members, and about 200 faculty members at UNLV have taken it so far. These are the 4 modules that are covered in the course. So it pretty much is pitched at the basic level. So for faculty members who maybe haven't spent a lot of time thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in the classroom, this provides them a starting point where we talk a bit about UNLV and our equity mission, how we became a minority serving institution and what that means for us. And we talk about our students, some of the demographics, and also how we can support them. We do some reflective work, thinking about who we are as instructors and what we bring to the classroom, and then put it all into practice in pedagogy, hopefully in that final module. It's a very practically designed class. We aim to give folks tools that they can use right away in their teaching and learning practice, and their final assignment for this course is to deliver a redesigned assignment or syllabus, or give us some thoughts about what they're going to do differently in their teaching and learning practice going forward. We worked on this project for a whole year and a half, basically from summer of 2020 till we rolled it out last fall, 2021. We had a whole team of folks working on it from online education, libraries, faculty center, our MSI student council, as well as subject experts from around campus who really generously shared their time and their expertise with us so that we could make this a UNLV specific sort of course. Anything you want to add about the course, Suzanne?
No, Melissa, I think you did a great job in encapsulating exactly what it is, and just that it has so far been successful on multiple levels, and we're got one coming up for the summer, and there's just been a very good response to it. And so it's just been really great to work with folks as they go through it.
Yeah, and we'd be really eager to talk with any of you about this kind of faculty development that you may have done. We're always looking for ideas, and we'd love to share thoughts about how to help faculty sort of move along in their journey towards more equitable teaching. So,
absolutely.
Yes, 200 faculty members have taken the training. There's a stipend involved. Our provost committed actually some of our COVID funds to this. So we're able to pay folks $500 for completing this 4-week course, which definitely helped. But yeah, 200 so far, and we have another 50 signed up for summer. Follow-up support for course redesign. So what they commit to at the end of the course is to make some changes. They do some reflection and also submit a plan for some changes. And what we're planning to do for a follow-up is start a faculty learning community in the fall, where we'll invite all of the alums to participate. We've had some interest in that already, and it definitely won't get everybody together, but we are going to have that learning community starting in the fall to hopefully continue that conversation and keep the energy going in terms of people continuing to make some changes in this direction.
Right. And the goal is for folks to take something tangible or something that they got from the course and make a tangible change in some part of their course, whether it's the syllabus or a course assignment or languaging, something that they got, and make that change. And then ultimately, hopefully, when they go to continue to design or redesign those courses, like those changes get worked in.
Nicole, that's awesome. How, who have been the leaders for those learning communities? Have you had a facilitator?
Oh, we have. So we've had, I've been co-facilitator for both of them with our previous director of our Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning and our current director of the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, which we call CATL on our campus. And the original one was actually started by faculty themselves, and they've kind of continued it on their own. And then the second one is specifically around gateway and introductory level courses, so that we're targeting inequities within those classes and looking at the data and the gaps in the data for achievement and how we could potentially shift those numbers to be more equitably aligned with the course outcomes and what we want our students to learn, regardless of their backgrounds or their personal identifiers.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, back to you, Inger.
Thank you.
I want to ask you guys a question. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before. A couple of us in the Peralta Equity team received communication from people, somebody at UNLV, right?
Do you remember what the department or?
No, I don't. I'm going to search my email
Was
for it
it
right now because I think we got communication. I was like, was that you asking? And they were just like, we just stumbled across your rubric and we just love some information. And
Yeah, I think it was Nicole.
I think it was
Suzanne.
I think it might have been Lindsay Russell.
Oh, maybe Lindsay.
oh, maybe. Anyway.
I know that one of our collaborators, Nicole Hudson, had seen the Peralta rubric, and that definitely informed our
Yes.
movement in creating this course.
That name sounds familiar.
Okay.
So.
Yeah,
Okay,
Nicole was
so-
one of the instigators.
Okay, Nicole, are you, I don't want to say the other Nicole LaGrow, are you ready to share?
Sure, and I was just going to follow up and say that we've already have approval and support from our provost for our next round of community of practice on equity to focus on applying the Peralta online equity rubric to their classes. And so it's been a really fruitful journey. For me, though, at this point in time, a lot of our work has been individual and focused on individual faculty and how individual faculty approach their classes. Even though we have the communities of practice, we don't really have training specifically or opportunities specifically around course design from start to finish. And so for my presentation, I focused on the strategy I use when I'm designing my own classes and when I'm working one-on-one with faculty in designing their classes as well. So I will share
And Nicole, will you tell everybody where you're from? Give them a little bit about your
Sure.
background too.
So I am Nicole LaGrow, and I think I just shared the wrong screen, so I apologize. It's the end of the day for me, and I'm in Central Time because I'm in Wisconsin, Green Bay, and I am one of the two new instructional designers. So previously I was our distance education coordinator up until last week. And then now I am one of the two instructional designers we have on our campus. So I'm looking forward to infusing equity, diversity and inclusion in the work that we do in our center and supporting faculty in their designing of courses. And I'm actually traveling with faculty to a statewide conference at the beginning of May, or end of May, beginning of June, really is the end of the day, to focus on social justice in our courses. So there's a lot of good things that are happening here, but there's still more work that we need to do. So let me try that screen share again. There we go. So this would be the slide image that I would take from my presentation to emphasize what my proposal or my presentation was about. And so I really look at these 5 elements in the graceful teaching method or the graceful teaching design that kind of frame out how I approach designing courses for myself and for the faculty I work with, starting with that foundation of a growth mindset, resources, agency, community, and expectations, where growth mindset focuses on the instructor not on the students. I think we spend so much time focusing on growth mindset activities for students and forgetting that faculty need that growth mindset too, especially when they're trying something new in a class or engaging with students maybe in something that they haven't taught before, or with students who maybe haven't heard it before. In Wisconsin, where I am in Green Bay, we are a predominantly white institution. And so that factors into some of the ways that we approach and encounter and engage with the content. And we are also one of the states that's potentially legislating against CRT. And so that also impacts and influences how we engage with equity in our classes, although equity is much bigger than those two factors. It is something that we are cognizant of. And so I encourage faculty to think about that growth mindset and engage with students in that growth mindset from the beginning, before they begin identifying the resources that they'll use to support student learning, building in opportunities for students to own their own learning, and supporting community through expectations in their courses in order to create a flexible and useful learning environment that supports 21st century learners. And so in my mind, we need to have those 5 elements in place first in order to support faculty in adopting equity resources, equity activities, equity thoughtfulness in the design of their courses before we can move forward with those other elements that are also part of creating an equitable learning experience by thinking about the differences and strengths that those differences bring to our classrooms.
Wow. I think, did any of the panelists and poster presenters want to say more, or can I just spotlight you all and then we could have like a panel discussion? Okay, so I'm gonna add a spotlight there. I'm gonna add a spotlight there. Suzanne, I'm gonna add a spotlight for you. Awesome. So do any of the, I mean, I got like 140 questions. We'll be here till, you know, midnight, but do any of the other participants want to ask some questions? And we're a small group, so I think if we're mindful of how we speak, we could just unmute yourselves and ask some questions, and then maybe each panelist could kind of quickly answer the question. Or if you don't want to unmute yourself and ask a question of the panelists, you could put it in the chat box. Focusing on equity, some people we know don't feel comfortable or prefer to speak out verbally, particularly when it's being recorded. Do any of you participants have any questions you could put in the chat for the panelists, or you're going to be stuck with all my questions? Oh, Dr. Melissa. Okay, yes, that's true too, right? Right. Your questions are even better than mine. So go ahead.
Yeah, so the work I shared was mostly on a rubric, but it was kind of part of a larger initiative that did have to do much more with faculty development. And one conversation we continually had kind of back and forth was this idea of providing space for really invested faculty who are excited to learn and know more, to like find each other and form community and like get that kind of professional development, versus professional development that was more rooted around their particular unit. So like something really more on the department level, even if that faced more opposition, like it was kind of, I guess, more authentic, like they live in departments and you really need to engage departments. So has that been a conversation with your efforts, like thinking about weighing those two models, or, you know, compromising between those two models?
Yeah, I'll say one thing we've talked about with the online course we developed is, well, two things for it going forward. We would love to have departments like take the online course that lives in Canvas and go through it together now. You know, we've done it at the university level. We've had this like broad interdisciplinary group sort of engage on this topic together. And it would be fantastic to have a department like take it on, because they would have a totally different kind of conversation. You know, they could dig deep talking about their particular students and their discipline and how equity sort of shows up for them in their online or in-person classes. So that's a hope that we have, but we we haven't had any takers just yet, but we haven't made a hard pitch yet either. But that is one potential future for this online course. And then another thing that we've talked about is the fact that it's a basic level course, and there are quite a few faculty members who would really like to dig deeper, who already, have way more expertise in this area than some of us who designed the course do. And so where's a space for them to, sort of go deep, have the harder conversations than just sort of our surface level stuff. And I'm not sure yet where that's going to go either, but it's something that we've talked about and there's some interest in. As of right now, our provost was just like, get as many people as possible to get the basics, and then maybe we can build on that.
I would second what Melissa shared. Our first community of practice was out of a department and their desire, and so they had a very tight knit already, and they were able to dive more deeply into their courses. And then our second community of practice, the call was across the institution, and so we had faculty from multiple disciplines represented. There's a benefit to both. I like the perspective of seeing how other people are teaching and approaching topics, but I also value having that tight-knit community. I would say one of our bigger challenges is that we tend to have activities going on all over campus. And so tapping into some of those partnerships might be a solution as well, to still be able to have that focused support, but then a broader approach as well. Like today we had our monthly inclusive reads through our library, which highlights one of our faculty members discussing a topic about EDI and how it impacts their life or their teaching or their work on campus. And so we kind of rotate through different speakers or different topics with a different one each month. And that's a nice way to kind of partner with another department in supporting this important work.
Do any of the other panel, do you guys have, you're all got these really great projects going. Do any of you have questions for each other? And of course, participants, other questions? I still have a million.
I have a question for Melissa and Suzanne, and it really comes back to a struggle I have, because we do the same thing and we use the same resource to provide stipends for faculty to complete training. And so our stipends were a lot more significant than the amount that you provided, and our faculty did do good work and did present information out that we could share out across campus with other counterparts and within the system. But I'm always struggle with that. Like, how much is too much, and what are we actually rewarding, and how do we balance that? Are we getting the people who we should be getting if they're coming, or are we getting the people who have the time or bandwidth, and what are they actually getting out of it? So any thoughts on that stipend system that we've kind of set up as we've all used COVID funding to provide support for faculty?
You want to go first, Suzanne?
Well, I think, sure. I address as best as I can, because I think that's a great question. And I think especially as we've gone through COVID, that's been a question for, some of the things, in addition to the Equity Institute, just across the university that we've done. I'm not sure how much is too much. I'm sure people would agree that, it's all good. But I think stipend or not, we've had such a diverse group of folks that have signed up for the course. We've had provost, deans of colleges, all, through tenured faculty, through part-time instructors, through graduate students. And my thought on it is, I am glad that all these people are touching this course, and hopefully taking away with them something tangible that they're going to use in their course, or more recently, this last time we ran the course, we had a fair amount of administrative faculty, right? Those folks that are student facing, right? And spend a great deal of time working with students and advising students. And so just given the number of people that are able to engage in the course and then take something away and, let us know, we get pretty extensive feedback from folks, whether good or bad, but people are very extensive with their feedback. And so I just think in that respect, I don't know what happens if we remove a stipend or if I doubt we would increase a stipend. But I think just that we're getting this number of people to be engaged with the course and take that conversation back into their departments, their communities, their colleagues has been a good thing. I don't know if that answers your question, but and Melissa, you may have information to flesh that out.
Yeah, I think that it's quite a small stipend, $500. I think it has encouraged some folks to take it, and it's definitely gone beyond our usual suspects. The people who show up for everything every time. We've gotten a lot more, even with that very small stipend. So I think it has done what we needed it to do. Actually, I talked the provost down, such a great negotiator. He said, should we give them $1,000? And I was like, it's not that much work. Let's just give them 500. So yeah.
This is so interesting to hear. I put a link in chat, but like what I presented today is just part of something going on Stanford that's very similar in the sense of like bringing on these faculty, engaging them in these conversations, training them to think about these inclusive teaching frameworks. And I just find it funny that you guys are talking about this because when we were planning this, I think many of the people at CTL, like all these thought partners, were all so on the same page until we got to the conversation about stipends. And then it became like an argument where it was like, conversations of like, oh, like, we never value DEI work enough. Like no one ever gives them money. It's all volunteer. And then other people being like, no, it's the wrong motivation, and like pulling out the psychology papers for like extrinsic motivation and talking about that. Like it was a fierce discussion. And then at some point it broke down into thinking about what that stipend meant for different people and different roles. Because one of the things we were actually really interested in was engaging faculty in addition to other people in other roles. So if you're thinking about how do you make the chemistry department more inclusive in terms of its education, you're engaging faculty, but there's often lecturers. Sometimes there's like postdoc grad students who play a really big role in the education. And sometimes you actually want the undergrads involved in like telling like what their experience have been and like giving that input. And so we're like, oh, that $500 stipend, what it means to a tenured faculty member versus a lecturer versus a grad student. Like we had this long conversation about maybe stipend, but contextually, and it was a very challenging conversation. I think we ultimately ended up on not stipends, but we did give like essentially a project grant, and many of the teams that were engaging in this work chose to give the project grant as like essentially a payment to the grad students who are involved or students who are involved to like engage in this work that was like extra, right? Like that's not their job to redesign courses or to help redesign courses, but it meant a lot to those students who are doing that kind of work.
I would love to jump in, if I may, at the community college level. So our district has 4 colleges in Oakland, and we, like you, Dr. Ko, we're deliberating the different groups of people. So for example, part-time faculty don't get paid nearly as much as full-time faculty, and they are often asked to do a lot of unpaid labor, right? Because they're paid only for their instructional time. So we felt like we really wanted to acknowledge that some people, their labor is different in the institution. And then we also felt like, okay, same thing, like we never give enough money to equity. There's money for a million things, but we don't really, we pay expensive presenters to talk for an hour, but how do we actually support change in our institution? And so we ended up doing $500 stipends for people to take the course, because we all, same dialogue, we sat around tables a number of times and felt like the course is so valuable and such hard work, and faculty, in order to pass it with 80% or better, have to really reflect on their own biases, their own social positioning. They have to analyze a couple of their own assignments and really interrogate them and each other's. And it's a really deep dive. So 500. And then we've been using grant money. We got a grant for CTE faculty, for example, to give them $1,000 if they redesigned their course, right, to a certain degree. And then they would be given a mentor off the team, and the mentor would work with them for however long it took for them to bring that course redesign up. And then they would get sort of an acknowledgement completion stipend of $1,000. So sometimes we didn't have that money, and some people actually said, I don't want the money. I'd rather you give that to another faculty member or part-time faculty member. But it's the same. We've had very similar conversations and have really struggled with it. And to be fair, to redesign a course all the way to meet aligns, right? Not even exemplary, with all of the rubric criteria. And Dr. Ko, you can see ours is not nearly as in-depth within each of the categories and criteria as yours is, right? It's much more sort of ambiguous. It's a ton of work. It is a lot of work. And so wanting to reward people for going through that process. Other participant questions, or for those of you who are here learning from these brilliant folks, imagining launching initiatives and rubrics and training courses at your own institutions, if you don't already have them. Any questions?
Yeah, even if folks don't have questions, I'd love to hear from other members of the audience. If you have this kind of faculty development, if you have rubrics or assessment items you've been working with that have to do with inclusivity. I see there is a question. I'm guessing it's more for the faculty development folks.
Yeah, I can certainly elaborate. So the courses that were asking faculty to make changes, right? And I haven't watched the YouTube videos, so I apologize for that. I have them queued up. I'll watch them after this session. I too am at a community college, and I serve on our DEI education committee. And we have been actively having conversations around folks who kind of are resistant to the work around DEI. So I'm curious about resistance that you may have experienced. What was the nature of that resistance, and how that was handled? If you feel like it's been, if you feel like there's a trend or a theme or anything of that, as opposed to it being sort of idiosyncratic.
I'll let you dive in as you want to, panelists.
I was just gonna briefly give like an overview of how I think of this, and then I welcome my panelists to chime in on like specific examples they've seen. But I think when I think of resistance to making these types of changes towards like aligning to what we know to be evidence-based inclusive frameworks, I feel like I hear mostly like what I call like the like inertia bucket, like not enough time, not enough energy, not worth my trade-offs to like focus on this. And then I have sort of the more like values driven objections where they like don't feel like it's a big deal, or they don't feel like it's their responsibility, or they don't believe it's real. And I address those two in really different ways. I don't know if this resonates with my panelists, but those are kind of things that I think about tackling a lot. Like with the former, it's like, oh, give them money and resources or support. Like even just having a student, like we found it incredibly cost effective to have a student employee of our CTL who just works with these people and kind of helps corral them, helps talk through their issues or give them feedback. And that's been very cost effective because they just needed that person to help corral and galvanize them. So there's like things we can do on that end, but the values thing, it's like that there's a lot of different strategies, and I don't know that anything I've tried is particularly effective. I don't know, does this resonate with some of the other panelists?
Yeah, it definitely does. For most of the faculty development activities that we're doing, you know, folks opt in, they choose to participate. So we're not dealing too much with resistors. It's, you know, mostly folks who are joining because they want to. But in terms of like overcoming the time issues and that type of resistance, I do think that providing graduate assistance or like that kind of time support can be even more effective than extra money, you know, because money doesn't buy you time, but having a graduate assistant or a student assistant who can sit and spend time with you, I think that sounds like a great strategy.
I'll just add to the conversation about faculty resistance that I think there was a significant pivot in faculty bandwidth as we went through COVID. We had started shortly before COVID, citywide read of Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race. Whether you love it or leave it, I'm not here to debate that today, but it was opening up conversation. And then as we were moving forward with those conversations across the camp, different universities and colleges in our area, we had to go to shut down. And then the conversation just stopped. We didn't continue with it online. Everybody was in panic mode trying to figure out how they were going to finish out the semester. And when we finally were able to get back to doing some of those elements that were so important for us to do, faculty just were too exhausted to pick up that baton again. And so finding that balance between the exhaustion that our faculty find themselves in just from the work that they're doing right now, and then trying to build this back in. And even though we're technically out of safer at home and the pandemic, we're still dealing with some of the repercussions of that, especially as we have spikes and surges. And so that creates additional challenges that interrupt what we're doing and potentially make people not willing to engage in those longer term projects because they don't know how they're going to be able to sustain it throughout the course of the semester. And if you don't mind, Dr. Coe, I'll start with some of the things that I do about equity in the online classes I teach. And I'm sure there are other ideas I can chime in, but one of the first things that I do with my students is a survey of them at the beginning to find when they anticipate interacting and engaging with the course. And then when I have group work, I try to group them together by the students who are going to be working on the weekend, or the students who are going to be working on it in the mornings or the evenings. And so I'm already kind of accounting for their difference in how they're going to engage and interact with the class. And that's one strategy that I use in an online class. And I know there are many others.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's the kind of thing where you can go on at length. I think part of why, in terms of coming up with this assessment tool and using rubrics, is that I think rubrics can be very aspirational. Like you see this level of like, oh, that's excellent, I want to go to excellent. And you see that description, you're like, oh, am I doing these things? Like maybe this is something I should incorporate more into my teaching practice. And so the reason why I linked that again is just because I think of these different categories, and generally speaking, if I'm between terms and I'm thinking about what do I want to work on and be better at, it's a lot to say that you'd improve all of them at once. Like that's just a lot. And so I try to focus on like particular areas or little subsets of things. But generally speaking, thinking about things around content, like how do you choose the content? Thank you for sharing that. Like how do you incorporate representation and like conversations around identity, even in a STEM classroom? And I teach STEM, so that's really important to me. So it's like maybe content will be the thing I work on by the time I teach this next, and trying to think about diversifying my content. But maybe instead, one term I think about community, like how can I have students get to know each other better, get to work with each other more, get to feel more seen and heard in the classroom? Or it could be a different quarter. I'm like, I'm going to work on assessments. Like maybe I can take a couple of my quizzes and redesign them to be open book and take home, or I can make things less high stakes and break them down. Like there's a lot of different spheres that you can choose to tackle. And of course, online is not exactly the same as in person, but I think a lot of the buckets are the same, just the way they look ends up looking kind of different. And you usually will have some sort of technology platform to enable that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Deborah, but feel free if you have more questions, happy to chime in.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm kind of a hands-on visual learner too. So, you know, my job involves training other faculty on how to teach online and supporting them in and out of the classroom. So, but I also teach part-time for a different college as well. So, you know, all of these, everything that's been said and demonstrated so far is valuable for me. You know, and an idea just popped into my head, and I'm brain fried right at the moment. I've been it's been a long day for me, but I'm just, you know, wondering if something like, and this may be a real simplistic thing, but something like non-graded quizzes, like once a week or once every 2 weeks, you know, that where students can sort of quiz themselves and or each other, and not for a grade or a score, but just to kind of see, you know, where they stand or what they're weak on or what their strengths are, you know, that kind of thing. You know, is that, it feels to me like a more equitable thing to do, but then I worry, well, what if the quiz questions are not equitable?
Yeah, I think I respect that it can feel like trying new things. Sometimes they raise their own issues. I would just say in general, what you bring up to me strikes two things. Like, one is helping students develop their metacognition. And I think metacognition is an area of huge equity differences, like students who have a lot of equity, or sorry, a lot of metacognitive training and those that don't. So I feel like just having them practice, like, what do I need to work on? What do I need to study more? Identifying those, working on those, like that's really critical. And the other thing you just mentioned is just like that opportunity for feedback and practice. Like, so that strikes me as a good strategy. But also if we're talking about grading, it's like, yeah, ungraded is helpful if it's just for feedback, but you can get into a whole nother can of worms if you talk about the grading side of things.
And I would just say that, to Dr. Coe's point originally, start small, do it with 1 unit, do it with 1 week's worth of work. Don't try to do it in your entire online class all at once, and really just build it out over time so that, and you're building in that growth mindset yourself. Tell your students or tell your faculty that you remember that you're working with to let students know, we're going to try this and see how it goes. And students are usually more willing to give you feedback, positive, negative, or indifferent, if they know it's something that you're trying that's not going to negatively impact their grade. And then you'll know if it's something that you should continue with.
Thank you. That is excellent. Excellent feedback. Thank you so much.
I agree with Nicole 100%.
You guys are offering it just like a mini course on it's really valuable insight and feedback. We have a few more minutes. Are there any other you know, attendees who'd like to slip in 1 or 2 more questions for our panelists? I just can't even tell you how much brilliant knowledge we have right now. I wish we had more time. And panelists, do you have any questions of each other or any final, would you like to, we only have another minute or so, but maybe you guys would like to wrap up, each of you, with some just sort of short comment or suggestion or farewell?
I was going to just suggest I'm going to put my email in the chat if anyone else wants to throw their email in to sort of continue the conversation. So I put mine in there. If people want to reach out, happy to chat more or collaborate with others.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to share this space with you, and I'd love to continue the conversation. If you have other questions or want to talk some more after you've looked at our posters, please do reach out.
Yeah, thank you. It has been just a great little mini knowledge and wisdom session, and I've really enjoyed seeing other people's work too. So thank you for that and for the great questions.
I think that I just want to emphasize again everything that's already been shared by my co-panelists, but I think that what we've had today, this afternoon, really does reflect the work that we all do in EDI and how we all work together to solve problems and think things through. So those email addresses are there because we want to continue the conversation. So please do reach out.
Okay, I can't thank you enough. I sound like I'm sort of mooning over it, but I really am, because a few years back, we felt very isolated and alone, and the community of institutions and educators who have really tried to create not just only conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion, but really structural support for faculty has really blossomed in the last few years. And you are 3 examples of how that has happened and is working. So thank you so much for your poster presentations and yes, so yeah, the information about the posters is on the webpage for the session. And thank you so much. Really, thank you. Hopefully we'll see you back here. You 3 institutions should collaborate to do a session next year at the Peralta Online Equity Conference and like take it one step further. Like, how do you get your institution then to really launch an initiative that supports faculty in course redesign or something? And how that works at different institutions, because that's a whole different thing, right? How you create institutional initiative and support. So thank you so much. Really, thank you. And thanks for participants for showing up.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.